Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be speaking to you. Thank you very much for for attending, I suppose it must be, today. Um, as I said, Glasgow Museum's an absolutely spectacular collection. And what I'm going to talk to you today, I'm going to illustrate it using the collections from Glasgow Museums. I'll introduce the link to the Society of Antiquaries shortly. But just a quick word about Glasgow Museums. A lot of the images you're going to see today are collections that have been generously bequeathed to the people of the city by R.L. Scott. You can see a gentleman sitting in the background there, and Sir William and Lady Constance Burrell. So a lot of these wonderful collections that I'm going to show to illustrate belong to the people because of them. That's R.L. Scott's breakfast crossbow room in the background there. I think everyone should have a crossbow breakfast room. So now I get very excited about things like this. The Society of Antiquaries has in its care a roll of payments dating to 1331 for the royal household, for the household of King Edward III. And it goes on and on. I can't remember exactly how long it is. I think it's 35 sheets altogether. But there's one tiny section that I came across, and it makes me very excited. I know I get excited about these things. There's one tiny section, and what it is, it's the expenses for a diverse armour for the body of the king, with the wages of a certain William the Hobbager, King's armourer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain who he is, what he does, and I'm going to work through the arms and armour that are mentioned in this very short section. So you'll have to bear with me, and we'll work through the whole lot, and hopefully it'll give you a little insight into the kind of equipment available to a man like Edward III. So first of all, Armatori Regis, I think this is quite important. King's Armourer, two beautiful images here. On the left, a painted chest that belonged to Sir Richard de Bury, who was Bishop of Durham. This is in Sir William Burrell's collection, coat of arms of England and France. The artist has actually done them the wrong way around, but we'll cut him some slack for that. The stained glass on the other side, 15th century. So King's Armourer, a man who provides armour for the king. Why have I decided to call him Wee Willie? Well, there is in other documents from London, one of the things to say is he's definitely a Londoner. In other documents from London, at the bottom there, he's a signature to the Articles of the Armourers of London of 1322. This is the regulations about making armour and the quality of armour. And he signs it as Gilo the Hobbager. We'll look at documents that are sort of in Latin, sort of in French, and sort of in English as well. It's one of the things I really love about them, the way they skip between. And another document at the top there of 1320 is Gilotus le Hobbager, who's a signatory who's paid for assessing some spearheads. So Gilot, Gilo Gilot, I'm 100% certain it's a diminutive of Guillaume, of William. So I've decided to call him Wee Willie, and there's a very famous Scottish Ur Willie. So that's his name. Hobbager. What is a hobbager? A hobbager is someone who makes hauberks. Hauberks are long mail shirts that had been used as a defense in Europe for centuries. A beautiful image there from the German Museum showing a hobbager, a mail maker at work. On the right-hand side there, you can see this is the Temple Pix. This is a wonderful object from Sir William Burrell's collection. Not much larger than my hand, which isn't enormous. And it's part of a pyx. It's often called the Temple Pix, the small casket in which the host is carried. And these are the three sleeping guards at Jesus's tomb. You can see one in the middle leaning on his arm there. But beneath those large shields, you can see these long mail shirts, these hauberks that are borne beneath. So hauberger is someone who makes hauberks. So what I've done is taken a pair of scissors and I've chopped up the antiquary's manuscript, and you'll see the little logo that I've used, so you'll know which bits I'm talking about. There'll be pieces from other manuscripts. So I've chopped up digitally rather than literally this manuscript, and I'm going to work through what the objects are. I'm not going to talk about prices here. If people are interested, and let you know, it's sort of the cost of everything and the value of nothing. These are payments. These are royal payments. So yes, everything's expensive. But what I want to do is talk about what these things are. So the first is one pair of mustelars with cuishes and one pair of gangpains. Now there's an incredibly tedious article by a certain R. Moffat in the Arms and Armour Journal of the Royal Armouries, and he looks at these words. Mustelars are some kind of lower leg defence. Cuishes are thigh defence. Gangpains are something to do with a hand defence for jousts and tournaments. As I say, the article is very long and tedious. I come up with various references, none of which actually tell us what these things look like. And I think that's something to think about. Just set my timer. That's something to think about. Some of these things that we're going to talk through, there are no existing ones to show you. So a lot of it, we've got to use a little bit of guesswork, and hopefully there's more out there to tell us what they are. On the left there, this is absolutely spectacular. It's an absolutely spectacular ivory mirror case in the Burrell collection. It's produced in Paris in the early part of the 14th century. This is the assault on the Castle of Love. And in the foreground there, you can see two knights jousting, and one struck the other right on the helm. Jousting and tournaments is something that we'll come on to in a minute. So mustelars, gangpans, something to do with jousting. 4 swords for the tournament. I'd love to be able to show you what a sword for the tournament from 1331 looks like, but unfortunately there are none. On the right-hand side there, you can see a very fine example of a 14th century longsword for war from Sir William Burrell's collection. At the top there, the Petworth House manuscript. This is a statute regarding the arms from 1292, 1291, 1292, from the 1290s, stipulating what arms and armour are allowed for the tourney in England. And one of the things is an espalage pour tourney, a long sword or a large sword for tourneying. The other images you can see there much, much later, but to give you some kind of idea of what these might have been like. Excuse me. This is from R.L. Scott, who I mentioned at the start, his library. This is a copy of Rennie of Anjou's book on how to hold jousts and tournaments. And these are wooden and blunted metal swords and clubs, which would be used in a sort of melee tournament where everyone just goes at each other and tries to knock each other off their horse or bash each other in, but not harm each other. And I think that's probably the key to what these tournament swords are, that they're blunted, that they're not designed to badly injure someone. Tournament and jousting equipment is something, there's another very tedious article that I've written looking at the development thereof. But what's happening is that there is specific equipment being developed for these events. If you look at the bottom there, it's 6 helms for the tournament. That's actually an inventory of Edward III's, I suppose his wicked stepfather, you might say, Sir Roger Mortimer. That's the Mortimer coat of arms in the stained glass on the side. I'm trying to teach myself a bit on heraldry as I learn more about the collections. So So there are specialist equipment being designed. That very sad fragment of the top of a helm you can see in the right, the top right, is actually the only substantial piece of plate armor ever found in Scotland. It would have been a beautifully polished and decorated helm. You can even see there's a crest holder on the top. This is another document I've come across in Gonville and Keys College. It dates from 1331, but it claims that that's a statute that Edward I promulgated about the tournaments that are allowed to be held in England, for 4 tournaments a year, as it says on the left there. It says he promulgated it during the siege of Stirling, which is in 1302 to 3. But there's an interesting section in it. It talks about the hobbages that are loaning armor within or beyond 50 leagues of the city of London, and they're loaning it for 7 shillings and threepence, as you can see there. So already hobbages are an important part of what tournaments are going on and equipment that's being lent to them. And when we think of tournaments at this time, this is a document in the R.L. Scott Library, that payments at the Tournoyement de Senlis. This dates from the 1291, I think this dates from. These are massive events in which thousands of men are rampaging across the countryside. So you mustn't think of them as a sort of anything genteel about them. They are training for war. They're very dangerous. And to say that Edward III is obsessed with jousting and tournaments, I think is a massive understatement. His father, his wicked stepfather, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, men who spent absolutely obsessed with jousting and tournaments, and the sort of the cult of chivalry that emerges from them, the ideas of the court of King Arthur, of the warrior Saint George, and the left-hand side there, that's the Order of the Garter that Edward III set up. And that stained glass window in Burrell's collection, that is possibly the earliest depiction of a garter round a shield. That's the shield of Sir Henry Fitzhugh. Dates to about 1420, 1421. It's possibly the earliest depiction of the garter around the shield like that. So jousting, tournaments. The next thing on our list, 6 pairs of plate gauntlets. Plate gauntlets, this is quite a busy slide, you have to bear with me. Plate gauntlets at this time are very elaborate hand defenses. On the bottom left there, you can see a fragment of a gauntlet that was found in Brickhill Lane in the 19th century. And you can see these little rivet heads. They would hold a fabric covering over the gauntlet, and the finger scales that protect the finger are missing, but we can get a really good idea. The spectacular gilt copper alloy effigy of Edward the Black Prince at Canterbury Cathedral, you can see how the gauntlets are shaped. You can see these knuckles, these spiked knuckles called gadlings. And the black and white photograph there are the achievements hung above his tomb. These are made of copper alloy. And the little holes, the one difference between the gauntlets that hang above and the tomb effigy is they're lost now. There's only one. This is a little drawing of one that survived, but there were knuckle dusters in the shape of the leopards or lions of England, which I think is a wonderful detail. Being punched in the face with it leaving an English lion indent. And the top there, this is the register of Edward the Black Prince, who gifts huge amounts of arms and armor. There's a pair of plate gauntlets gilded. He gifts huge amounts of arms and armor to his household knights, to visiting dignitaries. A stained glass in the top left from the Burrell collection. We'll come on to that in a minute. So 6 pairs of gauntlets, 2 iron corsets and 2 iron collars. It's very difficult to say what these are for certain. Ferris can be used to mean something that's iron. For example, there's a helmet called a chapel de fer, which is basically a kind of Tommy hat made of iron or steel. The iron collar, on the other hand, may be sections of plates of metal that are riveted into a collar in the way you can see the rivet heads on that gauntlet. Again, none of these survive, but I'm hopeful there are still ones to be dug up. So let's the last two pieces of armor before we come on to the mail armor are 1 bassinet and 6 aventails. A bassinet comes from the French for little basin. It's a very, very common head defense in the 14th and early 15th century. Here's a fine example on the right-hand side from R.L. Scott's collection here in Glasgow. Come in various shapes, but the most important thing is it protects the head, the thickness of the metal, thicker at the top, thinner at the sides, beautifully shaped to protect the head. The aventail is a male neck defense. If you look at the beautiful statue of St. George, this is produced in England about 1400. You can see this male neck defense, which attaches to the bassinet. So aventail, male defense. This really brings us on to the next section, which I think is, as a hobarger, this is kind of his day job. The rest of these are pieces of mail. So at the top there, 13 pairs of ponce and brachialia. In French it would be bras, and 1 pair of ponce and bras. A ponce, probably similar etymology to paunch, which is, excuse me, which is a male skirt. It probably starts very high at the waist and goes down a fair way to protect more vulnerable parts of the body. There's a beautiful, wonderful stained glass. This is in the Burrell collection. It's German from 1420s, 1430s. You can see the male skirts that these two guards at the tomb of Jesus have to protect their bodies. Bras, brachialia, brachialium are male sleeves. There are it's a pair of male sleeves, 15th century from the Burrell collection. At the bottom there, it gives you an idea of how these sleeves would be attached. That's a 16th century 16th century manuscript in the Real Almeria. But it gives you a good idea of how these male sections would attach. This little detail on the bottom right I've come across online, but I've not been able to locate exactly where it is. It's a Pisanello drawing of an injured knight being borne away from battle. And this is quite interesting, well, certainly to me and to other arms and armor nerds, that actually there could be sections of mail that protect the body which wouldn't be obvious by the time you had a breastplate or another torso defense over the top. So when you're looking at something like a tomb effigy, say, you can't say for certain that they're definitely wearing a complete mail shirt, that actually these could be sections of mail. And I think this is something that ties into the idea of the development of armor, of plate armor, of mail armor, that actually these sections are becoming more frequently used. So ponce and bras, 6 habergeons. The smaller version of the hauberk is a habergeon. It's a male shirt. This is an absolutely fantastic example in Glasgow's collection. Most of this, almost certainly 14th century. There are 15th century additions to the neck there. The rings are actually quite different. It's more like a 15th century male neck defense, but it's an absolutely splendid example of a male shirt. And this is really what we really would be working on as an expert, or he and his workshop would be working on. We'll come to that in a minute. 6 peasants. Now, a peasant is a type of collar of mail. Specialist expert Dr. Claude Blair suggests there's a thickening of the male links of the rings that make it fit tighter to the throat which seems absolutely plausible to me. I've very wildly speculated that that it might be a joke on the safety of the city of Pisa, that this is the kind of thing you should wear when you're in Pisa. It's not clear if they're made in Pisa, if they're of a type that were fashionable in Pisa. Very difficult to say, but Pisan collars. One pair of iron gussets. These are, again, shaped male sections to protect vulnerable parts of the body. And this bottom section here, this wee Willie's been paid for the enlarging of a pair of pons and bras of steel for the king. So I think there's something very suits you, sir, about this, that wee Willie is actually he's actually fitting pieces of these mail to the king, to quite vulnerable parts of the king. And I really like that idea of this man and his importance to fixing and arranging, and probably having to be quite sensitive at times as weight gets put on or comes off. So this is getting towards the end of the section, and I think I was really excited when I came across this. For one piece of silver bought by him for mending and repairing one pair of chaussons of silver for the king. Chausses are a leg defense, leggings of mail. This wonderful psalter that you can see on the right-hand side, this was produced in Paris in the 1220s. It's the psalter of King Louis, Saint Louis of France and Blanche of Castile. This is Goliath wielding his sword, but you can see these wonderful chausses. These are ones that lace up at the back. So what would it look like? How would you decorate chausses with a piece of silver? This is a bit of a busy slide again. I think it try to give you an idea. At the back there is a bishop's mantle, a mail defense, but you can see these copper alloy rings that have created these stripes through it. Or if you look at the right-hand side, this is a Spanish tomb effigy in the Barrow collection, early 14th century, but you can see it's been painted, and these sections, these painted sections, give you an idea what these decorated rings would look like. And this opens up one of the things I spend too much time looking at our inventories, wills, documents that try and tell us a bit more about arms and armour. So the top there, that's an inventory of the Count of Hainault in 1358. He's got a coif. This is a head defence of mail, similar to what you can see on the tomb effigy there, of the old-fashioned with fleur-de-lis of Latin. Latin is a copper alloy that's used a lot in the Middle Ages, and what he's saying there is that the actual fleur-de-lis pattern has been made into the coif. Below there, for gilt mail for mending the hauberk of my Lord Edmund. This is an inventory of the Thomas Duke of Clarence, and this is his young stepson, Edmund Beaufort. So gilt mail, pieces of gold mail to fix his mail shirt. This is before they go on campaign in France. At the bottom there, I really like this one. This is Eleanor, Duchess of Gloucester, whose husband is one of the Lords Appellant and is murdered. And here she's leaving a habergeon with a cross of Latin marked over the breast around the heart, which belonged to my lord, his father. So this is her giving her son the habergeon of his murdered father. So you've got to imagine this wire, these pieces of silver that are being made to fix the king's silver trousers. I think there's something wonderfully glamorous about how these chausses would have looked, something very Bowie-esque perhaps. But it's not all glamour. It's not all glamour at all. The other payments, as we get towards the end of the section, are for the upkeep of mail armour. So 2 flagons of oil and 3 bushels of bran bought by him for the king's armor to roll and to preserve from the rust. So oil, bran, and rolling. Now, what does it mean to roll? There's a tiny section of a nice stained glass there. You can see a barrel. At the bottom there, this is a section of payments for the repair of arms and armor dating from the 1340s, again English as well. A rolling barrel, 3 barrels of oil, flagons of oil, 4 quarters of bran for fraying, for scouring the said armor. So what you do is you put all this in together and you roll it round in a barrel, and that scours the armor. But once that's been done, it also needs to be looked after. For example, Edward of Carnarvon, Edward III's father, his keeper of armor paid for white chamois, white leather, for polishing the king's hauberks. So you get all this grease on, and then it all has to be polished off. But it's not necessarily Wee Willie who's doing all this work himself. This is for the wages of 8 workers for working on the said armor, the aforesaid armor. This is a lovely stained glass in the middle, 14th century English. This is just someone working away. And it opens up a question. People like Wee Willie, who appear in civic records, he's a freeman of the City of London. Is he actually doing the work, or are others doing the work, doing all the hard work, and he's taking the glory for it? Is he a master craftsman who's coming in and doing the tricky parts? For example, if you look at that mail shirt behind you, there's wire drawing. Those are all hand clipped rivets. These would be the apprentice's job: sweeping the floor, clipping the rivets, all the work that goes into it. And someone like Wee Willie might just come along and do the very difficult sections, like under the armpits, for example, where you're having to shape the defense with different shapes of ring. So what I'd say is, I hope that's given you a sort of insight into how objects, how inventories, how people can come together to tell you more about arms and armor and about collections. But what I'd also say is, archives, organizations, libraries, museums, you need them and we need you at this very, very difficult time, especially. And as things get better, we will be able to open museums again. So please do come and visit to see the spectacular collections for yourself. Also find out a bit more online. A lot of Glasgow's collections can be found online, details thereof, images as well. So there's a lot there to be found out about. This is one of my preemptive slides. I often bring this up when people ask questions. Armor, is it heavy? How do you wear it? Things like this. This is a series of payments: a helm, 2 bassinets, a pair of shinbalds, plate leg defenses, lower leg defense, a pair of paulaines, knee defenses, plate gauntlets, a pair of pons and bras, the male sleeves and skirt, skirt and sleeves, 1 peison, 1 aventail, that's the male neck defenses, pair of plates, that's torso defenses, and van brace and rear brace, those are plate arm defenses. If you look at St. George's glass, again there you can see the enclosing plates. Now, this is the account of the keeper of the wardrobe for the Duke of Cornwall in 1337. If I'm often when I can see people in the audience, I'll often shout out, who is the Duke of Cornwall? Who is the Duke of Cornwall today? He's someone who tries to punt his duchy originals. The heir to the throne of England is the Duke of Cornwall. Duke of Cornwall in 1333 is Edward III's son, Edward the Black Prince, and Edward is 7 years old when all this armor is being bought for him. So he's 7 years old. He fights his first battle just after he's turned 16, but he's been in this harness. He's been training and bearing it and jumping on horses and doing all the things that he needs to do. So often I tell people who are relearning fight techniques, who are talking about buying armor, and I'm saying, well, unless you've started at 7, you've left it too late. You really need to get started as young as possible. But very little child's armor survives. There are sections of one at Chartres Cathedral. So, and there may be more still to find, but things like documents can really give you a great idea. There he is, Edward the Black Prince. This is St. Stephen's Chapel, Westminster, sadly destroyed by fire. These are paintings that have been made of him. So you've got to think of this as a young man, as a child into a young man, able to bear this harness. And I think the link between people, objects, and how to bring these together and to get people to engage more with collections is something that I really, really enjoy. So that little section of a parchment roll in the Society of Antiquaries library, I think it just shows you how much more there's to be found and what we can say and how we can illustrate with these objects. So I'll leave it there, and I'll just thank you very much for listening. And this is details of the next lecture. And I hope you've got lots. I've given plenty of time for questions, so I hope you have lots of questions about that. And of course, you can get in touch with me at any time through our website if you want to know more. So thank you very much.
Thank you for a wonderful talk, Ralph. That was absolutely fascinating. We've got a question from Francesca Levy. She says, first of all, thank you, Dr. Moffat, for a super talk. And she would like to know whether you have come across any references for mail proof against bolts or arrows.
That's a very, very good question. There's another terribly tedious article by a certain R. Moffat on, it's called The Importance of Being Harnessed, which is a terrible pun. But there's a Scottish Earl, Earl Archibald Douglas, who spends his life fighting against the English, actually. And in one battle, he loses an eye. He fights at the Battle of Shrewsbury because he's taken captive at Homildon Hill. He fights at Shrewsbury because he's not sure whether he wants to get involved in the English Civil War. But one of his knights points out, says, well, let's look on the bright side. If it's English killing English, it's a win-win for us. And in that battle, he loses one testicle. So there are vulnerable points in the body. It doesn't bear thinking about how that happened. There are references to proofing plate armor with crossbows. The earliest reference I've come across is Vireton d'Espreuve, proofing bolts from at Angers in 1378. We know that they're proofing armor at close range, plate armor at close range with crossbows. Mail armor, I'm not so sure. I've yet to come across references to mail, but that's a really, really good question. And if anyone comes across something like that, do let me know. The other thing I suppose that I should have mentioned from the start is mail needs to be borne over thick padded protection. In the 14th century, it would be an acqueton. Sorry, I do this Simon Says thing when I talk about arms and armor. You have to bear with me. Acqueton comes from the Arabic al-qatan, where we get our word cotton from, a thick padded doublet that would be borne beneath the mail. So the mail's the kind of the outer section, as it were. And I think that's really important, that the mail is just one part of that protection. But yes, I'd like to know. I remember reading an article about people putting mail on a pig and shooting arrows at hopefully a dead pig. I'm certain it was a dead pig, and loosing arrows at it and seeing how well it defended. But the riveting in mail, that's something I'm getting very technical, very nerdy now. But in wills, for example, they'll mention if what they call highly nailed, highly riveted, or half nailed. And this means if all the sections, all the links are riveted together, it's worth more. These are often given to eldest sons and the, for example, bastard sons are sometimes given the half nailed one, which means it's a combination of solid and riveted links. But there's clearly a difference between the two and the fully riveted. I think the difference would be it offers more protection. But unfortunately, you never get a straight answer from a curator. What I'd say is not yet. That would be the short answer to that. But it's a very good question.
Thank you, Ralph. Francesca also says, thanks from Simon, Windsor Castle.
Oh, right.
I don't know if that means something to you.
Yes, it does. It does. That's yes. We met a long time. This is a man who's the Queen's Armour, if I'm correct, who knows a great deal more about the practical side than I do. If you look up Queen's Armour and Royal Collection, if it's the Simon I'm thinking of, this is a man who could tell you a great deal more about what Wee Willie would have done on a day-to-day business than I can. So that's nice to hear from you. Hello to you.
Yes, Francesca says, yes, he is, and Simon Metcalf is watching with me. We are both watching from the castle.
Oh, wow.
And she says, she asks, similar references to mail of iron or mail of steel?
Yes, yeah, that's important as well. There's a case in Paris in the 1409, and a certain merchant has brought in habergeons, and he's tried to pass them off as Milanese habergeons by putting false marks and signs on them, and he's also claimed that they're made of steel when in fact they're made of iron. So he gets stung. I think it's 100 sous, Persian sous. So it's a big fine that he's slapped with for doing this. And you do get that in regulations, that it must be clear to the buyer: is this iron? Is this steel? The difference between iron and steel is very important. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Iron, steel, and it'll often say that section, one of the sections, the lines there was the King's. It mentioned steel as it picked that out as being steel. I'm trying to remember which one it was. Yeah, in one of the lines. But that's a very good point as well. Yeah.
She says, thank you, that is so interesting.
Oh, that's kind.
We have another question as well from Sue Hyde. She says, thank you, Ralph. Did tournaments go out of fashion with the death of Henry VIII?
Oh, I would say that tournaments have never really gone out of fashion. The gentleman who was in position here in Glasgow before me was at one point the world's only jousting curator. You may have seen him on television. He's been jousting for a very long time. Yeah, jousting tournaments are something that I think the fact that Henry is nearly killed is quite important. You know, it is still a very dangerous pastime, but it continues to be important for quite a long time after that. Probably the death knell in France is the death of Henry II, who has a splinter works its way in through his eye socket, and he dies 11 days later, jousting against the captain of his Scots Guard, his private bodyguard, which I quite like. But that was a celebratory joust as well, so a complete accident. But what I'd say is that they've never gone out of fashion. They're still going as we speak. There are lances breaking and there are people training. But Henry, from an English point of view, what you get is probably less exciting things like running of the ring, which involves trying to catch a very small ring on a string at the end of your lance. It's a bit soft in comparison. And then one of the things I've come across as well is interesting that the change between the sort of melee, the mad tourney, and the joust. There's an English preacher, John Bromyard, a Franciscan, who's preaching in there are copies of his preachings. He's from the 1330s, and he's saying that, you know, these knights now, they use big heavy lances and they knock down each other. But what is the point of knocking down a man of peace when they won't go near their enemies and they ran away, which have happened of late? And he's almost certainly talking about the Battle of Bannockburn there. He's really digging into the English knights. You know, why are they doing this jousting? You know, it's pointless when they should be fighting for the king or fighting on crusade. Another example of that is what's he called? Earl of Salisbury, Montague, Earl of Salisbury, who's a great friend of Edward III, and it's John Lebel. I think it's John Lebel who says, you know, the king was really close to this man. He was a hard man. He lost an eye in a tournament, and the king made him Earl of Salisbury. You know, he says in the same sentence that basically this man is from the old guard of the tough ones, of when you could lose an eye in a tourney rather than one of these jousts. I think the jousting is seen as a sort of, it's a bit safer. It's also more individual demonstration, sort of show of skill, whereas these big tourneys, it's harder to know who's who and what's going on. So what I'd say is the jousting, hopefully jousting will never die. I think it will remain fashionable for as long as people can wield a lance and ride a horse.